and rise and shine. Dry bones wind together in the valley, and some of them bones is mine.
Down in the valley, the Spirit spoke. Ezekiel, go prophesy. And Ezekiel saw the valley full of dead men's bones, and every bone was dry. Dry bones gonna gather in the morning, come together and rise and shine. Dry bones gonna gather in the valley, and some of them bones is mine. I first heard those words of a Negro spiritual when I got my calling in life, to make the dead live again. I helped stop the building of a federal parking pavilion on an African burial ground near Wall Street in New York City. And what they were trying to do was to add this pavilion to a federal office building that was already existing. That's where they found the burial ground. Thousands of first-generation Africans were enslaved at the African burial ground, and no one knew they were there.
You do not disturb the deceased. You leave our people alone. You let them rest in peace.
They just thought that over time, anyone buried there, the bones would be disintegrated. And that's where we did our dedications. We were right across the street at another federal building and facing this space. This is now a memorial to the enslaved people that were buried there, and it's managed by National Park Service. And got inspired to go to law school to fight for slavery reparations. I thought my case would be against the federal government, but the California case, Cadu versus United States, was decided. It blocked descendants of enslaved people from suing the United States for slavery reparations because the government had not waived its sovereign immunity. It had to give permission in a law for such a case. In law school, I learned about the law of restitution, which prevented the unjust enrichment of parties that possessed ill-gotten gains. Tainted assets could be traced and disgorged or taken away and given to proper beneficiaries. I learned about Holocaust cases against corporations, so I started doing research to find corporations complicit in slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. The first one I found was Aetna Incorporated. I called them up, asked for some old slave policies, and they sent some over. The first document I found was the Aetna slave policy. And as soon as the story broke in the media, they backed down on the restitution. I'd like to see that the truth is told, and that these corporations that committed horrendous acts against my ancestors pay restitution. They should not be able to keep assets they acquired stealing people and stealing labor. I was shook when I saw the policies. Children as young as 10 years old were insured. Slave owners were the beneficiaries. If the enslaved person died, Aetna would reimburse the owner 2/3 of their value. This encouraged plantation owners to purchase human chattel, a very expensive investment at that time. I called them back, and asked them to create a trust fund and pay restitution to our community. They said they would increase college and university scholarships at African American schools, but when the media followed up, they changed their story.
Beyond our apology, no further actions are required.
Sorry, but no deal. Aetna apologizes for its role in slavery, but offers no restitution.
It was clear we had no choice but to sue. By this time, several other companies had been identified, and plaintiffs from around the country joined the lawsuit. Some had been held, like Emma Marie Clark, enslaved by plantation owners until the 1930s on a dairy farm. The FBI got a tip from a visitor to the plantation inn and emancipated her. The owners served a few years in jail. Some were the biological children of enslaved people, like the Hurdle family. Some were like me, several generations from slavery. My maternal great-great-grandparents were runaway slaves from South Carolina. Their descendants moved to New York, where I was born. Our lawsuit did not yield any payments, but it did set precedent in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago. Judge Posner held that companies that lie about their connection to slavery to keep customers are liable for fraud. We are keeping up the fight because the transatlantic slave trade and chattel slavery were financed by these billion-dollar corporations that are still around. They owe us. Slave voyage insurers did business under Lloyd's of London. The company is responsible for millions of stolen people being sold, but also for people being dumped in the ocean alive. If captives arrived on shore sick and died, transatlantic insurers would not pay on the insurance policy. So in cases like the Zong or Amistad, people were dumped in the ocean alive to avoid the risk of death upon arrival. Most recently, Lloyd's of London decided to pay a restitution down payment of £55 million to African and Caribbean interests. But they refused to pay anything to African American descendants of enslaved people, even though they covered voyages of people enslaved in the United States. New York Life Insurance Company's predecessor company, Nautilus Life, wrote life insurance policies on the lives of enslaved people. This encouraged plantation owners to invest in expensive human chattel and employ them in ultra-hazardous capacities. When New York Life Insurance started out as the Nautilus Company, 1/3 of their first insurance policies were slave insurance. The first policy they ever paid out was on the life of an enslaved person who died in a coal mine accident. Bank of America's predecessor bank, the Providence Bank of Rhode Island, was founded and controlled by slave traders, including the slave trade advocate John Brown. One of the things that John Brown did with the wealth that he acquired in the transatlantic slave trade is he invested it in the founding of Brown University. It's actually named after him and his family. We reached out to Brown University to inform them of their history and to request that they do something about John Brown's role in building the school with slave profits. As a result, when Ruth Simmons became president, she convened a commission that studied their history, and ultimately they issued a report and created an endowment, which I was told would be $100 million. The slave traders were exposed in Jay Cocktree's book, The Notorious Triangle. They violated United States and Rhode Island slave trade prohibition laws. U.S. custom records matched the illegal voyages at the time that Bank of America's predecessor was the exclusive collector of customs and duties fees. Since many of the bank's shareholders were the illegal slave traders, the bank knew they were engaged in illegal slave trading. Thousands of people were enslaved illegally. Fines worth billions of dollars in today's currency were never paid by the bank or the slave traders. According to the book, The Stolen Wealth of Slavery by David Monteiro, Citigroup was built on banks that financed slave plantations in the Caribbean and Latin America, where humans were worked to death and lost limbs operating sugar mills. There have been several corporations that actually paid what we call reparations, down payments. Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, Wachovia are just a few, and those three alone paid a total of $20 million as a result of this corporate restitution effort that we initiated, this corporate complicity demand. Most recently, Lloyd's of London joined that group of corporate complicit entities that made reparations down payments. They just committed £50 million to Africa and the Caribbean and South America for their role in the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Slavery was stealing people, stealing their labor, torturing them, and forcing them to breed to give uncompensated labor and wealth to build this nation. Reparations is payback for nearly 3 centuries of uncompensated labor to build one of the most powerful nations in the world, as well as other Western nations, all of which are the superpowers in the world today. Down in the valley, a spirit spoke. Ezekiel go prophesy. And Ezekiel saw a valley full of dead men's bones, and every bone was dry. Dry bones gonna gather in the morning, come together and rise and shine. Dry bones gonna gather in the valley, and some of them bones is mine.